Hello there and welcome to our special coverage with me. I'm Abdulrahim Kashouk coming to you live from Algiers on AL24 News. Ukraine is suffering significant setbacks in parts of the country's east amid grueling street-by-street battles in the key city of Severodonetsk, with the British Defense Ministry saying that most of the city is now in Russian hands. A spokesman for Ukraine's National Guard said Kyiv is making every effort to hold back the enemy, even as up to 100 its fighters are killed daily. The Russian-backed self-declared Lugansk People's Republic says it now controls all of the Lugansk region except the cities of Severodonetsk and Lysychansk. On the other hand, US and Germany and even France are sending more weapons to Ukraine. So, how the situation will be in the coming days? Several questions have been raised. Will Ukraine's eastern part of the country be saved or to be given up? And now, Russia's Putin will face the new set of sanctions. How they will face it? All of this is going to be analyzed today in our special coverage by our panel of guests. I'm joined live via Skype by ALESSANDRO, an Italian international security and geopolitical analyst located in Hungary, and Dr. Oleksiy Semeny from Ukraine, Director of Institute to Global Transformation in Kyiv. Gentlemen, thank you so much for accepting our invitation to this debate. The show begins right after this break. And before we delve into our discussion, let me read for you, gentlemen, this piece of information. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov on Wednesday accused the US of pouring fuel into fire after it announced plans to supply more weapons to Ukraine.
Specifically with regard to weapon systems being provided, the Ukrainians have given us assurances that they will not use these systems against targets on Russian territory. There is a strong trust bond between Ukraine and the United States, as well as with our allies and partners. Let's start with this. It's Russia that is attacking Ukraine, not the other way around. And simply put, the best way to avoid escalation is for Russia to stop the aggression and the war that it started. It's fully within its power to do so.
Dr. Semeny, since you are in Ukraine, where all is going, I'll be starting with you. Don't you think that US and Ukraine allies are very late to aid Ukraine now with these strong, effective weapons? Why they didn't do that at least a month ago? Were they afraid of the Russian response?
I suppose, of course, it could be done a little bit earlier, but if you understand the logistics of all such, let's call it, operations or assistance, you should understand that it does not proceed very fast. And what is going on, it's more or less in normal limits of such assistance. So I suppose there is no too late. Of course, Ukrainians wanted and still wanted that this supply, this assistance come as soon as possible, because actually after we have some balance on the ground with the weapons and munitions, Russians has almost no chance to sustain. And they will be forced just to come back at least to the line of 24th of February. But until now, they have some superiority in the air. They have prevalence on some actually directions in artillery systems, in munitions, and until they have this, some superiority. Of course, we will fight, but unfortunately, we will have just to move backwards. But with any kind of perspective, actually, the Russians, I suppose, already have lost the war in general. The issue is to what cost and in what time the victory will be on our side.
Mm-hmm. Don't you think if US could aid Ukraine earlier, wasn't better? Because you could have finished this military operation probably a month ago.
Of course, but you should understand the other way around. That, okay, there could be a thesis from Americans that they are a little bit, not a little bit afraid of Russians, but de facto. Why? Because of nuclear weapons and because of some back channels from Moscow, where there should have been some information provided to Washington, D.C. that if you supply too many armaments, munitions to Ukraine, then we will open the other options. And of course, if you take this just like on the balance for US is not Ukraine. They should think first of all about their interest. On the one way, okay, assisting actually the country which you would like to assist, which you suppose is the victim of aggressor. But on the other side, if the threat is coming directly to your country, by all your sympathy to Ukraine, you will choose the second option. So it's logical, unfortunate for Ukrainian, but nevertheless.
Quite understood. Mr. Alessandro, as a European, don't you think that as long as this war, the so-called military operation, goes longer, it will be harmful more and more for Ukraine and all the EU Union, which perfectly serves the US interest in weakening EU economically, which will lead all EU countries to rely on US aid?
Well, I do agree on the fact that economic sanctions will damage the European Union as well, because they are always a double-edged sword. But I don't agree on considering it as an advantage for the United States, because America, especially in this moment of difficulty, where it needs allies to counter Russia, has the need for strong allies in Europe, economically and consequently also militarily. But I think at the same time that once the effects of the economic sanctions, especially on the food prices and fuel prices, will become more widespread and more felt by the European population, some politicians will be able to exploit a discourse criticizing the United States and advocating for the European Union, and even not the European Union, but just its single member state to just proceed on their own way and not follow the US-led foreign policy. So as a kind of expect this to result in
Sorry to cut you to train of thought, Mr. Alessandro, but just it comes to my mind that that idiom says you can kill two birds with one stone. US in this war is weakening its rival, Russia, and economy challenger, EU. Do you agree with that?
No, in the sense that, true, it's damaging Russia, but as I said, the United States also need strong European allies. And while it's true that to some degree there is competition between the two, still Europe is considered a vital and very important ally for the United States, and it needs Europe to be strong. So I expect it will do whatever it can to sustain also economically the European Union if it's necessary to prevent widespread economic crisis that would left it weaken, and also, as I was saying before, vulnerable to politicians and political discourses that are against the European Union and the transatlantic alliance.
Quite understood. All right, moving on to the second point. Russian forces continued their advance in the Donbass by targeting several Ukrainian towns in the east and approached full control of the Lugansk region, while Europe imposed a six-package of sanctions on Russia. In the latest failed developments, the Ukrainian forces are fighting a fierce street war with the Russian forces in the city of Severodonetsk in the eastern Lugansk province. Dr. Semeny, it seems that the main goal and the main focus for the Russian troops is the Donbass region. Do you think that Ukrainian forces could resist even more to sustain in front of this huge power shield in the eastern part of the country?
Yes, because actually now we see the last, I would suppose, the last wave, the last attempt of the Russian forces to get something feasible in the Donbass region, because the line of the front is very huge. It's for European scale, it's a very huge front line, and only in Donbass the Russians are going, because they concentrated the major forces exactly there, and they try to advance as much as possible, and they advance very slowly, but nevertheless for the last months approximately 1 kilometer per day, but with huge losses, with huge efforts. But afterwards, after they will stop, and they will stop, because the lack of resources, first of all, manpower, with whom they have problems, and then maybe with some other, let's call it, be it tanks, be it even artillery systems, they have already some problems reopening their old reserves, re-implementing, for example, the tanks that have been produced 50 or even 60 years ago in the times of the Soviet Union. This is a sign that they are lack of resources. So in this way, we're expecting in a few weeks, at least in Donbass, after maybe they reach some successes more, they will stop. But then will come a phase, and not so much in Donbass, what is happening already in the south, when maybe the Ukrainian forces will come to counteroffensive. And let's see how the Russian reaction to counteroffensive will be. Because, and especially if the flow of munition and some military assistance will increase from the West, the Russians will be in huge trouble. Because actually they have only the one way to respond, to have mass mobilization in Russia. And this step would mean a lot of troubles in political sense. Until now, President Putin and the Russians don't like to go to this measure as the last step. So in Donbass, unfortunately, I expect that they will try to move on further, but I suppose they are already on the edge of their resources, where they are quite scared. So let's see what the next solution from Russians could be from this, because actually the way they have gone before, it's like the World War II tactics. But now we are living no more in the world of 20th century, but 21st century. And these differ a little bit from that world. And the Russians are, unfortunately for them and for everybody else outside, stuck in the 20th century or even in the 19th century tactics.
Quite understood, Mr. Semeny. Mr. Alessandro, Russia's main target behind this military operation was to stop the NATO expansion eastward Europe. But now, Sweden and Finland has applied to join this alliance. Could we say that Russia has failed to reach the ultimate goal, which is preventing NATO to be enlarged precisely near the Russian borders?
Yes, surely it is an unintended and consequence and contrary to Russia's interest, because it's getting exactly what it wanted to avoid. But it's also true that at the current stage, the application process is still in the making. And there is the big problem of Turkey's veto, which is a considerable obstacle in this sense, and it's not already sure it will be overcome. And also expect Russia to do whatever it can to start to prevent this from happening. I don't expect another special military operation, as they call it, because they are already stuck in Ukraine with very important problems and having suffered heavy losses. But expect them to use their diplomatic and economic tools, as they already started doing so by cutting gas supplies to Finland, in order to prevent this from happening. And I would not exclude, I'm not saying it is going to happen, but it's a scenario that we should keep in mind, in my opinion, that they, in case Finland and Sweden proceed, Russia might consider using nuclear weapons against these two countries in an extreme attempt to prevent them from joining NATO before they do.
Understood. Coming back to you, Mr. Dr. Semeny, don't you think that the Donbass region will turn to be a Russian land if Moscow's troops succeeded to take all of the eastern part of Ukraine? This report comes to the scene after the Lugansk and the Donetsk residents want to join Russia for good. What are you saying about this?
First of all, let's be clear in definitions. If we're talking about eastern Ukraine, it's not only Donbass. Ukraine, for European scale, as Algeria, is quite a huge country. So, and Donbass, it's not all of the east. Until now, the Russians occupied approximately 20% of Ukrainian territory. In 2014, with annexation illegal of Crimea and parts of Donbass, it was 7%. So now they have got more. But Donbass is not the whole eastern Ukraine. With regard to the perspectives of Donbass and Lugansk to be annexed as part of Russia, yes, I suppose there will be some kind of attempt from Russia to do this. Moreover, they already decided to do this, and for this, they need to capture fully in administrative borders Lugansk and Donetsk regions. Now they are actually on the verge to have something like this in Lugansk region, but with this agglomeration, Severodonetsk and Lysychansk, it will not be easy, because these are two connecting points, and Lysychansk on the other side of the river is much more difficult to capture as Severodonetsk. But the other story, much more difficult, will be to capture the parts and quite a huge parts of Donetsk region, with a huge industrial agglomerations, with other military preparations made by us. So let's see, but I agree with you, they will try, definitely, because the whole story, this false narrative, they would like to liberate Donetsk, Lugansk, and they need some kind of signs that they reach their goals, that they are mighty power, and actually, until now, they failed. If you follow up their declaration starting from the beginning of this war, from 24th of February, and their initial aims, the initial aims are just being less and less, starting from capturing Kyiv, no, then Kharkiv, no, then maybe fully the eastern Ukraine, no. Now the maximum aim is to get Donetsk, Lugansk regions. Okay, let's see. But in any case, if it is even in military sense is going to happen, in a very few months or in a very few time, the Ukrainians will fight back, and the counteroffensive will be definitely, and nobody here in Ukraine will agree on less than coming back to the line of 24th of February. And the Russians should be clear with this. And I suppose there will be a huge surprise for Russians that the Ukrainians are not ready for any kind of other agreement as to come back to the status quo ante, so the line of 24th of February.
Quite understood. The United States on Tuesday welcomed the embargo on Russian oil imports decided by the 27 countries of the European Union to hinder Russia's advancement. EU leaders reached an agreement on Monday that should cut their imports of Russian oil by some 90% by the end of the year in order to cut off funding for Moscow's war in Ukraine.
And we applaud the steps by our European allies and partners to reduce their reliance on Russian oil and natural gas by diversifying their sources of energy and reducing consumption in line with our shared climate goals. As you know, there is a near-term component to this, and the EU took an important step on that near-term path, but then there's also a longer-term path that has more to do, less to do with the day-to-day and more to do with trends over time and the broader need to lessen our reliance on Russian energy and fossil fuels.
Sir Alessandro, don't you think that this sanctions policy is a suicidal policy that will harm other European countries more than Russia itself? And as a vivid example, you are now in Hungary, one of the most affected countries from these sanctions that destroyed the economic basis over there.
Well, as we were saying before, the economic sanctions will, of course, also impact Europe, at least to some degree, and until until different sources of supply for oil and gas are found, which will take time and will not be so easy.
What is clearly seen is that these sanctions is creating a division in the EU. Bulgaria is threatening not to back these sanctions. Hungary is suffering. What are you saying about this?
Well, for the current state, I see the situation here to be relatively calm. But of course, it could be just the calm before the storm, as they say. Of course, it also created divisions between among the European Union member states, and Hungary's role was important in this sense because it opposed the deal on oil. It's still opposing the deal on gas, and even the fact that the oil sanctions have been will be implemented by the end of the year. So after 6 months from now, it is an example of how there were divisions, and not only from Ukraine, from Hungary, on implementing an immediate and full ban on Russian oil imports.
Understood. Dr. Semeny, as Ukrainian, do you think that this sanctions policy will serve Ukraine's call to put an end to this war as soon as possible? And if this policy really works, Don't you think that it will be on the collapse of another nation, such as Hungary and Bulgaria? I mean, will you accept the salvation of Ukraine over the fall of another nation?
The first part of the question, I suppose it's a little bit not correct to tell in this way, maybe, but I can elaborate further. But the second part, which could be more important for you, I don't think that neither Hungary or Bulgaria confront now with some existential threats or threat of salvation. No. Moreover, actually, the Hungary, according to the last meeting of the EU, which happened exactly a few days ago, they actually have got what they wanted. There will be the further oil supplies for Hungary, especially so the economy of Hungary will have no direct impact from the decision of Ukraine, somebody else. Bulgaria, moreover, because for Bulgaria it's not about the oil, more about the gas, but quite small numbers, plus Bulgaria have another supply routes via Turkey or from others. So this is not the case that actually the European countries can have some kind of threat of salvation. The threat of salvation, or maybe even hunger, or many quite drastic problems would confront, I hope not, but would confront many Mediterranean countries, maybe African countries, because of the grain problem. And this is exactly the problem which is now being taken globally, both by UN, by many responsible countries, how actually to force Russia to stop, at least to provide some kind of ceasefire in this war, plus to reopen the routes via sea where the food supplies could come, because Ukraine was responsible for approximately 400 million people all over the world for supply of the food. And you can imagine what the effect now it has, because the grain is here in Ukraine. It is just stuck and blocked by Russians. So you should address Russians to reopen the gain to stop the war in order to get no more problems. Because unfortunately, due to this war, sufferings is more going to the poorest people globally and not to the richest one, which we should see the richest one refers to European Union, United States. So you should understand these logics. And the logic is you should stop the aggressor who opened the door to the hell in order to get the problems back and to normalize situation and to bring the people more comfortable situation, because this is like vicious circle. Energy prices, then food prices, political instability, and all the mess which would come immediately, and this should be somehow stopped and settled, and this is exactly the issue.
Quite understood. So grain is the main target right now. We can replace oil, but we can't replace wheat. Quite understood. Final results show that Denmark will join the European Union's defense strategy following a referendum held on Wednesday, signaling the latest trend among Nordic nations to strengthen defense links in reaction to Russia's military operation in Ukraine.
Majority of Danes today voted yes to put an end to the Danish exception. This now means that Denmark can take part in European cooperation on defense and security, and that makes me very, very happy.
Sir Alessandro has a direct question. Would Italy come back to use Russian gas if this war ended the way the Western leaders want? If so, how Italy will deal with the extra agreements has been signed recently with Algeria and Angola from Africa and other countries from the Gulf region?
That's a good question. But I think that no matter the outcome of the war, these agreements are going to be respected. I feel that this conflict has caused a shockwave across Europe and not only in Italy, concerning the need to diversify our energy supplies. And in this logic, we concluded the deals you mentioned. As a result, and considering that even after the end of the war, relations with Russia will probably remain very tense. I expect this deal to be fulfilled, and a continued and gradual disengagement from Russia's oil. Of course, with time, in the medium and long term, it's possible that imports will rise once again, but it will not happen very soon. It will be difficult and long-term process, in my opinion.
Quite understand. All right, moving on to the last point to be discussed, since we do have a lack of times over here in the show. Swedish Prime Minister Magdalena Andersson said on Tuesday that her country will continue to negotiate with Turkey about joining the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO. These statements came as a response to Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan regarding the talks of the Swedish and Finnish delegations in Ankara recently, which said that talks were not sincere. Dr. Simini, don't you think that the Sweden and Finland may face the same fate as Ukraine, since they are trying to join NATO, just as Ukraine wanted before? I mean, will Russia launch another military operation over the Scandinavian countries to protect its national security as they claim?
No, I suppose the war against Ukraine will be the last war for Russians for next decades to come. They were a little bit, I would suppose, the policy stupid. If you have the argument you would like to prevent the NATO enlargement before, what was the argument about Ukraine? One of the main arguments. Now you have, or you will have, one more border with NATO for over 1,300 kilometers. So the Russians, if you take seriously the previous declarations and nowadays reality, they're just stupid in this. To go the war against Finland or Sweden, you can just calculate the military capacities. You can understand that now they have both
Dr. Simini, I'm sorry,
and US guarantees. So this is unfortunately for Russians, this is just impossible to force Sweden and Finland to something else.
Dr. Simini, I'm sorry to cut your train of thoughts. One of the arguments that Russia has put over this operation is that they claim they will banish and stop the Nazism in Ukraine. What are you saying about this?
This is also stupid arguments, because now if you take the actually specification what Nazism is actually, you can see that now on the most of the elements it's exactly about Russians, what they do in Ukraine and against Ukraine. And secondly, you can hear from Russians only this declaration they fight against Nazism, but without no explanation on details. What does it mean for them? This is just the general term because of Russian propaganda used as the analogy of World War II and Great Victory, which was the victory of the Soviet Union, or together with allies, apropos with United States, United Kingdom, against Nazism. But now, if you take the clear scientific definition of Nazism, you will find many of these elements absolutely clear now correlating to Russian policy today against Ukraine.
Mr. Alessandro, what are you saying about this? And do you think that Turkey will eventually accept Nordic countries' memberships?
Well, in regards to Turkey, I think that at some point it will. Probably Turkey is trying to use its leverage to obtain concessions on its security goals. For example, being readmitted in the F-35 program, receiving the upgrades to F-16V, having free hand in the Eastern Mediterranean, especially in regards to oil and gas policies and its disputes with Greece, its military operation in northern Syria, and so on and so on. So Turkey is trying to use its leverage, its veto, to obtain concessions in this sense. And considering the current geostrategic situation, I think that at some point the EU and the United States and NATO will try and will manage to find an agreement with Turkey, so it will ultimately withdraw its veto to Finland's and Sweden's membership.
Quite understood. Dr. Simini, Turkey wants to play as a mediator of peace as well. Do you think it will be successful in this endeavor? Last word to conclude, so the floor is yours.
Maybe it could be successful because actually President Erdogan has quite a good personal ties, both to Mr. Zelensky and Mr. Putin. Moreover, one meeting already has happened exactly in Istanbul between two delegations. I don't exclude that in nearest time there will be maybe another meeting or even trilateral talks. So this role could be taken by Turkey, although due to the hostilities and all the clashes in this war, this is a very hard role to happen, but I hope that Turkey could be successful in this endeavor.
Thank you ever so much, Dr. Semeni from Ukraine, Mr. Alessandro from Italy. Thank you so much for your participation with us in this show. Thank you, dear guests, for this participation. Thank you, dear viewers, for this watching with us in AL24 News. Bye for now. Take care.